Most people think a school library is the safest place in the building. Quiet, controlled, predictable. But if you have ever stayed there alone after closing time, you know the silence feels different, like it is waiting for you to notice. Heidi learned that during my senior year at a public high school in Wisconsin, a year that already felt heavy because everything in my life was changing too fast. College pressure, family expectations, and the constant feeling that I was falling behind everyone else. I started staying late in the library because it was the only place where nobody asked questions. Teachers assumed I was studying. Friends assumed I was busy. And at home, there was always noise that made it hard to think the library officially closed at 6. But during exam season, the security guard would do one last round and then leave a few lights on for students finishing up, trusting us to lock the side door when we left most evenings. It was just me. The hum of fluorescent lights, the soft rustle of pages turning, and the distant sound of traffic outside the windows at exactly 6:15 every night. Something strange happened. It was subtle, easy to miss if you were distracted, but once I noticed it, I could not stop noticing it, the feeling that I was no longer alone, not the feeling of being watched, not fear at first, just the sense that the room had gained weight, like another presence had entered without making a sound the first time it happened. I laughed quietly to myself. Nerves playing tricks, that is what I told myself. Old buildings settle. Silence amplifies imagination. But the feeling returned the next night. And the night after that, always after 6, never. Before I began paying attention to details, the placement of chairs, the position of books left on desks, the way shadows fell between shelves. Nothing ever moved, nothing ever looked wrong. Yet every evening after 6, I found myself sitting more rigidly, listening harder, avoiding the darker aisles between shelves. One night, while packing my bag to leave, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. There was a chair pulled out at a table near the back. Not mine, not any chair I had seen earlier. It faced away from me, toward the shelves, like someone had been sitting there quietly and left without pushing it back in. Stood there longer than I should have, telling myself it meant nothing. Someone earlier, maybe the guard, maybe another student, but the library had been empty. I was sure of that. As I walked toward the exit, I felt it again, that same pressure in the air. Heavier now, closer, like something had stood up behind me. Did not turn around. I locked the door and left that night. I told myself I would stop staying late. The library had other plans. The next day I told myself I would leave before 6. No excuses, no delays, just pack up and go. But time moved strangely in the library. Minutes stretched quietly, and before I realized it, the clock above the reference desk showed 6:10, the moment the minute hand passed 6. That familiar pressure returned, heavier than before, like the air itself had thickened around me. Froze for a second, my pen hovering above the paper, listening. There was no sound, no footsteps, no breathing, nothing I could point to. Just that undeniable sense that the room had changed. I slowly looked around, scanning the tables, the aisles, the far corners near the fiction shelves. Everything looked exactly the same, and yet something felt closer. I packed my bag quickly, the zipper sounding far too loud in the quiet room, and stood up, forcing myself to walk calmly toward the exit. Halfway there, I noticed movement, not a figure, not a shadow crossing the floor, but a chair near the back table slowly shifting, scraping softly against the tile. Like someone had adjusted their seat. My heart jumped into my throat. I stopped walking, the chair stopped moving. We stayed like that for several seconds. The silence stretched tight, waiting to see who would move first. I swallowed hard and took another step. The chair slid back under the table, neat and careful, as if whoever had been sitting there wanted to leave no evidence behind. I left immediately, my hands shaking as I locked the side door. My chest tight all the way home that night. I dreamed of the library in the dream. I was sitting at my usual table, studying, calm, while behind me chairs were slowly being pulled out one by one, filling the room without sound. When I woke up, my sheets were damp with sweat, and the dream clung to me in a way that felt wrong, like it had not fully stayed in my sleep the next evening. I did not plan to go back, but my routine pulled me there anyway. Like something was guiding my steps. Without asking permission, I arrived earlier than usual, hoping that being there longer would make the place feel normal again. It did not. At 5:58, I watched the clock carefully. At 6 exactly. The lights above the back shelves dimmed slightly, not off, just lower, like someone adjusting them manually. I stood up and called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the open space, asking if anyone was there. No answer, but the pressure remained stronger. Now closer, I realized then that whatever shared the library with me did not want attention. It wanted acknowledgement, and the more I noticed it, the more it stayed after that night. The feeling followed me, even when I was not in the library. I would be sitting in class and suddenly feel that same pressure in my chest, like someone was standing just behind my chair. I started checking over my shoulder without realizing it, earning strange looks from classmates, but I could not explain what I was feeling. Because there was nothing visible to point at, tried skipping the library for 2 days, studying at home instead, but the noise there felt unbearable now. Every sound too sharp, too sudden, and strangely, I found myself missing the controlled silence of the library on the 3rd day. I went back. I told myself I would stay only until 5:30 and leave early. But as always, time slipped, and before I noticed, the clock crossed 6 again. The pressure returned instantly. This time, I did not panic. I sat still, hands flat on the table, breathing slowly, testing a thought that had been forming in the back of my mind. What if it was always there? What if it only became noticeable after 6? I cleared my throat and spoke quietly, not asking a question, not calling out, just acknowledging the space around me, saying that I knew I was not alone. The library did not respond with sound. Instead, the pressure eased slightly, like a held breath being released. It scared me more than any noise could have, because it meant I was right from that night on. The presence became routine. After 6, chairs would sometimes be pulled out when I was not looking. Books would be left open on tables I had not touched. And once I even found a notebook filled with handwriting that looked uncomfortably similar to mine. I stopped telling myself it was coincidence. I started adjusting my behavior. Instead, I sat straighter, moved slower, avoided sudden movements, and most importantly, I never acknowledged the presence directly again, as long as I pretended not to notice it. It stayed quiet one evening, as I packed my bag and prepared to leave. I felt the pressure shift behind me. Closer than it had ever been. A chair directly across from me slid back slightly. Not fully, just enough, like an invitation. I stood there, my heart pounding, every instinct telling me not to sit. The pressure intensified, heavy and insistent, filling my head with a single thought that did not feel like my own. I backed away slowly, shaking my head, whispering that I could not, that I had to go. The chair slid back under the table. The pressure vanished. I left the library trembling, realizing something important. It was not trying to scare me. It was trying to make me stay after that night. Leaving the library became harder than staying. Every evening around 5:30, I would tell myself I was done, that I would pack up early, but my body always moved slower. My hands lingered on pages longer than they should. The presence did not rush me anymore. Waited. Some nights it stayed far back between the shelves. Other nights it felt close enough that my skin prickled. But it never crossed a line, never touched me, never made a sound. It was how it learned patience. I started noticing changes in the library itself. Small things that no one else seemed to care about. Chairs arranged slightly differently after 6. Books returned to shelves that I knew had been checked out. The clock losing a minute every night and then correcting itself by morning. I tried talking to the security guard once, asking if anyone else stayed late. He shrugged and said most students left on time, then added something strange, that sometimes he locked up and still felt like he was forgetting someone. That sentence stayed with me one evening. I arrived earlier than usual and chose a table directly in the center of the room. No shelves behind me, no dark corners nearby. I wanted to remove its advantage. At 6 exactly, the pressure arrived. But this time, it did not surround me. It sat across from me. The chair opposite mine slid out slowly and stopped. I stared at the empty space. My hands clenched, my breath shallow, every part of me screaming that something was there, even if my eyes could not see. Heidi spoke quietly, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm, saying that I knew it wanted me to stay, but that I could not. The pressure tightened, focused, heavy like a weight pressing down on my chest. The chair slid closer to the table. I stood up abruptly, the sound echoing too loudly, and the pressure spiked, sharp and overwhelming. Like the room itself had turned against me. Books fell from a nearby shelf. Not thrown, just released, landing hard on the floor. I ran. Irani did not walk calmly anymore. I ran for the exit, my footsteps loud and uneven, my vision blurring as I fumbled with the door behind me. Chairs scraped violently now, no longer careful, no longer patient. I burst outside and did not look back that night. I knew something had changed. I had broken the routine, and whatever stayed in the library did not like that. I did not return to the library after that night, not for studying, not for shortcuts, not even to walk past it. I changed my routines completely. Stayed in crowded places, left school as soon as classes ended, filled my time with noise for a while. It worked. The pressure faded. The nights felt normal again. And I started believing that whatever lived in the library could not follow me outside its walls. Graduation came and went. Life moved forward, and the library slowly became just another building I no longer thought about years later. I returned to that school for an alumni event, older, calmer, convinced that time had softened those memories into something harmless. The library had been renovated. Brighter lights, new furniture, glass walls replacing dark shelves. Everything designed to feel open and safe. I walked inside during the day, surrounded by people, laughter, voices, and for a moment, I felt foolish for ever being afraid of this place. Then I noticed the clock. It showed 6:10, and the room felt heavier. Not much, just enough. I stood very still, listening, feeling that familiar pressure settle around me again. Older now, more patient, like it had been waiting for me to come back on my own A chair. Near the center table, slid out slightly, just enough to be noticed. No one else reacted. No one else seemed to feel. I stepped back slowly and left the library without saying goodbye. That was when I understood something I had never considered before. The library was never empty after 6. It simply waited for someone who noticed. Once you do it, remembers you. The first time I noticed something wrong with time inside the school library, I did not feel scared. I felt confused, because nothing traumatic happened. No sound, no movement. Just a quiet moment that did not fit. It was my junior year at a public high school in Oregon. And like most students trying to avoid crowded hallways, I spent my free periods in the library, sitting near the back windows where the light stayed soft and nobody bothered me. The library had rules posted everywhere. Phones silent, food prohibited. Library closes at 5:30, and I followed all of them. Mostly because routines made me feel safe. One afternoon, I checked the clock on the wall before opening my book. It was 4:45. I remember that clearly. Because I had a bus to catch at 5:15, I read for what felt like 10 minutes, maybe less, when a strange stillness settled over the room. Not silence, but a pause, like everything was holding its breath. I looked up at the clock again. It still said 4:45. I frowned, thinking the clock had stopped. But the second hand was moving, smooth and steady, circling again and again. Without changing the time, I checked my phone instinctively, even though phones were not allowed. It said 4:58. When I looked back at the wall clock, it jumped forward suddenly, landing on 4:59 like nothing strange had happened. I laughed quietly to myself, blaming cheap equipment and stress. That was my mistake from that day on. I started noticing patterns that did not make sense. Moments where time inside the library stretched or folded in on itself, where 5 minutes felt like an hour, or an hour vanished without warning. Sometimes students would stand up to leave and then sit back down, confused, saying they felt like they had just arrived. Sometimes teachers would walk in to check on us and leave shaking their heads, saying the bell system was acting strange. Again, I began testing it without telling anyone. I would write down the time before entering the library, and again when leaving. Every entry was wrong, always off by a few minutes, sometimes by much more. The strangest part was that nobody else seemed to care. Like the inconsistencies simply slid past their awareness. One evening, I stayed after closing by accident, lost in reading, and when I finally looked up, the library lights were dimmed, the room empty, and the clock showed 5:30 exactly. I stood up quickly, panic rising, knowing the doors should have been locked, but they were open. The hallway outside was dark. Completely silent, I checked my phone again. It said 6:42. I stepped back into the library, my heart pounding, realizing something that made my skin crawl. Time outside had moved on, but inside the library had barely moved at all after that evening. I stopped trusting clocks altogether. I checked my phone obsessively, compared it with the wall clock, my watch, even the computer screens inside the library, and none of them ever fully agreed. What scared me was not that time behaved differently, but that it behaved differently only in certain places, specific tables, certain aisles. Like invisible pockets where minutes slowed down or sped up. Without warning, I started mapping it in a notebook, drawing rough outlines of the library and marking where time felt wrong. The deeper I went toward the back shelves, the worse it became. One afternoon, I sat near the history section and read for what felt like half an hour. When I stood up, my legs cramped painfully, like I had been sitting still for much longer. The clock said 4:20. My phone said 5:07. Bell rang outside. I panicked and ran for the exit, bursting into the hallway just in time to see students rushing past, already late, already annoyed, already unaware of how close I had come to missing something important. I tried talking to the librarian, asking casually if the clocks ever broke, if anyone complained about time feeling strange inside the building. She smiled politely and said the library had always been like that, then paused and added something unsettling, that some students liked it because they felt they had more time there. That night, I dreamed of sitting in the library alone, watching the clock spin wildly while I stayed perfectly still, unable to stand, unable to call for help. The dream felt too real, like a memory instead of imagination. The next day, I noticed something worse. People leaving the library did not always remember how long they had stayed. A friend told me she thought she had been there for 10 minutes, but her phone showed she had missed an entire class. Another student claimed he had studied for hours, but his notes barely filled a page. I started leaving earlier, afraid that if I stayed too long, I would lose something I could not get back. But one evening, while packing my bag, I felt that same pause in the air again, that unnatural stillness, and when I looked up, the entire library was frozen. Not silent, frozen. Students mid-step, pages half-turned, a pen suspended just above paper only. I could move the clock on the wall, spun backward slowly, each second scraping against my nerves, and I realized then that the library was not just bending time, it was choosing who experienced it when the world unfroze. It happened without warning. Sound rushed back into the room all at once. Pages turned, chairs scraped, voices overlapped, and everyone continued like nothing had happened. I stood there shaking, my heart racing, trying to decide whether what I had experienced was real or a stress-induced hallucination. No one reacted. No one asked why I was standing. No one noticed anything strange. From that moment on, I felt singled out, like the library had marked me as someone aware enough to notice its rules breaking. Time distortions became more focused when I sat at certain tables. Minutes stretched painfully. My thoughts slowed. My movements felt heavy when I moved closer to the exit. Time rushed forward, making my chest tighten as I realized how much of the day I had lost I tested it carefully, stepping in and out of those zones, watching my phone clock jump unevenly, sometimes skipping ahead, sometimes lagging behind one afternoon. I stayed too long in the wrong place. I remember opening my notebook and writing the date at the top of the page when I looked up again. My hand was sore. The page was full of notes I did not remember writing. And the library was nearly empty. The clock said 5:30. My phone said 8:42. My heart pounded as I realized the sun had already set outside. I rushed out of the library, my legs weak, my head spinning, only to find the school halls dark and locked. I was alone. Panic set in as I tried every door, my voice echoing uselessly in the empty building behind me. Somewhere deep in the library, I heard a soft sound, not footsteps, but something like pages being turned slowly. I turned back despite myself. Inside the library, the lights were dim, and the clock now moved backwards smoothly, deliberately, like it was correcting a mistake. The air felt thick, heavy, familiar. I understood then that the library did not want me to leave yet. It wanted more time. I stopped fighting the clock after that night. Panic only made time slip faster, so I forced myself to breathe slowly, standing in the dim library while the second hand crawled backward. I checked my phone again. The screen flickered and then went dark, like it no longer mattered here. The pages turning sound stopped, replaced by a deep, heavy stillness, and I felt the library settle around me, closing in gently, but firmly. I walked toward the exit, one careful step at a time, testing whether the space would allow it, and to my surprise, the pressure eased, like the building was curious instead of angry. The clock slowed, then stopped. I reached the door and touched the handle. It felt warm, too warm behind me. The clock jumped forward suddenly, spinning wildly, and the library lights brightened all at once. Sound returned, footsteps, voices, laughter. I was back. Students rushed past me like nothing had happened. The clock now showed 3:30. Early afternoon. My phone turned back on the date. Was wrong, not by a day, by a year. I stumbled out of the library, dizzy and disoriented, and for a long time I avoided that building completely. I graduated. I moved on. Told myself that whatever had happened was a glitch in my memory, a stress-induced break that time had smoothed over. Years later, I returned to that town for work, and one evening, driven by curiosity I could not explain, I walked past my old school. The building stood quiet, windows dark except the library. Its lights were only. Checked my watch. It was 5:29 as I stood there watching. The clock visible through the glass ticked forward, 5:30, and then stopped. The pressure settled around me again. Familiar and patient, I walked away without looking back, because I finally understood time did not break inside the school library. It stayed waiting for someone with time to give. Nobody ever talks about the back corner of our school library, because most students never even noticed it. They came to read comics, use computers, finish homework, and leave, but I was different. I stayed late, I stayed quiet, and I noticed things others ignored. It started during my final year in high school, when pressure was everywhere. Exams, expectations, future plans, and at home things were not easy either. So every afternoon after classes, I escaped to the library. It was the only place where noise could not follow me. Tall shelves, dusty books, old wooden tables, soft yellow lights, and a silence that felt alive. I always sat near the window at first. But one evening, all the usual seats were taken. So I walked deeper into the library, toward a dark corner I had never used before. That corner had the oldest shelves, the thickest dust, and the weakest light. Only one small lamp worked there. I hesitated, but I needed a place to sit, so I went there anyway. That was the first time I saw the book. It was lying alone on the bottom shelf. No title on the cover, no author name. Just a plain black book with slightly torn edges. For some reason, my eyes could not leave it. I picked it up without thinking. It was heavier than normal books when I opened it. The first page made my heart stop, because it had my name written on it, full name, correct spelling. No mistake, I froze. I looked around, expecting someone to be watching me, laughing at some stupid prank, but the corner was empty. No footsteps, no whispers, nothing. Just silence. I told myself it was coincidence. Someone must have written my name there long ago. Maybe another student with the same name. So I sat down and started reading. The first chapter described a boy sitting in a school library, feeling lonely, worried about exams, thinking about his broken home. Every line matched my life. Every feeling was mine. My breathing slowed. My hands started shaking. I kept reading. The next page described me walking into the dark corner for the first time. Described the weak lamp, described the dusty shelves, described the exact table I was sitting at. That was impossible. I closed the book quickly. My heart was beating too fast. I stood up and put it back. Then I ran out of the library. That night, I could not sleep every time I closed my eyes. I saw that black cover. The next day, I tried to avoid the library, but after classes, my legs took me there without permission, like something was pulling me. I walked straight to the back corner. The book was waiting, in the exact same place, untouched. I picked it up again. This time, a new page had appeared. It described me returning. It described my fear. It described my sleepless night. It described everything. I wanted to throw it away, burn it, destroy it, but I could not. My fingers would not let go, so I kept reading. Days passed, and every day the book wrote my life before I lived it. It predicted my test scores, my arguments with teachers, my fights with my parents, my secret thoughts, things I never told anyone. It knew everything. Then one day, the book showed something new, a chapter called The Last Day. It described me staying late in the library after closing time. It described the lights turning off. It described the doors locking. It described me being alone in the dark. Trapped, I stopped reading. My chest felt tight. I promised myself I would never stay late again. I would never touch that book again. For 1 week, I avoided the library. I studied at home, at cafes, anywhere else. But stress kept building, and one evening, before exams, I broke my promise. I went back. The library was almost empty. Only a few students left. I went to my usual seat, not the corner, but I could feel the book watching me. calling me, whispering inside my head. After 30 minutes, without realizing, I was standing in front of it again. I opened it. A new line appeared. "You are running out of time." My hands were cold. I kept reading. The chapter described tonight. It said I would stay until closing. It said I would forget the time. It said the librarian would leave without seeing me. It said the doors would lock. I looked at my phone, 7:40 p.m. Library closed at 8 o'clock. I packed my bag immediately. I started walking toward the exit, but halfway, the lights flickered. Students began leaving, chairs scraping, bags zipping. Then suddenly, silence. The lights turned off. Except for the small lamp in the back corner, the door slammed shut. I ran, pulled the handle, locked. Panic exploded inside me. I banged on the door. No response. The whole building was empty. Then I heard it, pages turning slowly from the back corner. I turned around. The lamp was brighter now. The book was open on the table. As if waiting against my will, I walked toward it. Each step felt heavier. Like walking underwater, the book showed a final page. It said, "Only one way out." Below that, a sentence appeared. "Take my place." I did not understand. Then I noticed something. The shelves around me were changing. The books were disappearing, one by one, turning into black covers. Just like mine, each one had a name. Different names, different students. I realized the truth. This library was full of trapped stories. Students who never escaped. Students who became books. I screamed, I cried, I begged, but the room did not care. The book started glowing softly. My vision blurred. My body felt lighter, then heavier. Like I was sinking, I woke up on the floor. Morning sunlight coming through the windows, students walking in, talking, laughing. The library looked normal. Teachers found me unconscious. They said I fainted from stress. They took me home. For weeks, I avoided that place. I never went back. Years passed. I graduated, moved away, started a new life. I tried to forget. But sometimes at night, I still dream about that corner. Last month, I visited my old school, out of curiosity, out of weakness. I went to the library. The corner was still there. Same shelves, same lamp, same table. And on the bottom shelf, a new black book, with someone else's name on it, not mine anymore. That is when I understood. I escaped, but the library never stopped collecting stories. And maybe, one day, it will write yours too.